Ethan Miller had always been the kind of man who kept his life neatly in order. He liked quiet mornings, steady work, and evenings spent with the soft hum of his computer filling the room. Nothing in his life ever surprised him, and that's exactly how he liked it. But life often begins to change the moment we stop expecting anything new. For Ethan, that change began with something small, a forgotten umbrella. The day had started like any other Thursday in Seattle gray skies. Slow rain and the distant sound of traffic mixing with the rush of people hurrying home. Ethan sat by the window of a little cafe he often worked from. It was a cozy place, the kind where time seemed to move slower, where conversations blended with the smell of roasted coffee and the faint sound of soft jazz playing in the background. He had been there for almost an hour, lost in his code and his thoughts. Before realizing the rain had turned heavier outside, he packed his laptop, paid for his coffee, and stepped out into the wet street only to notice the umbrella he had left resting against the chair inside. He sighed, annoyed with himself, and turned back. That's when he saw her. Amelia Brooks stood at the counter, her auburn hair tied loosely, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She was speaking to the barista when her eyes caught the forgotten umbrella on the seat. She smiled and reached for it. By the time Ethan walked in again, she was holding it out toward him. "You left this," she said, her tone warm, as if she already knew him. Her voice carried a softness that made him pause for a moment before taking it. "Thanks," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. Their fingers brushed lightly as he took the handle, and though it was nothing more than a polite gesture, something about that small touch lingered. She noticed his hesitation and gave a playful smile. "You looked like you were in a hurry," she said. "Guess I was too focused on the rain." Ethan answered, a little awkward, a little amused. She nodded toward the laptop bag on his shoulder. "Work?" He nodded. "Yeah, software design." "You..." "Artist," she said simply. "I draw people when they don't notice." That made him laugh. "So I should be worried you already have a sketch of me somewhere." She tilted her head, pretending to think. "Not yet," she said, eyes sparkling. "But you looked like someone worth drawing." It had been a long time since anyone had made Ethan smile like that. Something about her felt easy, natural. Before he could think of what to say next, the barista called out that they were closing early because of the storm. Amelia picked up her sketchbook and slung her bag over her shoulder. "Well," she said, glancing at the rain outside, "looks like you'll be needing that umbrella after all." He held it open, half joking, half sincere. "You could share it," he said, and just like that. They stepped out together into the wet evening. The rain fell harder now, turning the streetlights into glowing circles reflected on the pavement. They walked close under the umbrella, moving carefully so neither of them would get wet. The air smelled like rain and coffee, and though the world around them was noisy and rushing, inside that small circle of shared space, everything felt quiet. So Ethan said after a moment, "You really draw strangers?" She nodded. "Everyone tells a story through their face, through how they sit, how they look at the world. I just try to catch a piece of that before it disappears." He thought about that. "And what story do I tell?" Amelia smiled, glancing at him through the corner of her eye. "You look like someone who's waiting for something to happen but doesn't believe it ever will." He blinked, unsure what to say. It was a strange thing being seen that deeply by someone he had just met. But she wasn't teasing. Her expression was gentle, curious. They reached the corner where their paths would part. She stopped, folding her sketchbook against her chest. "This is me," she said. "Up those stairs. I have a little studio up there." He looked at the building, an old brick place with a narrow stairwell glowing under a single light. "You work there?" He asked. "I live there too," she said, smiling. "It's small, but full of paint and sunlight when the weather's kind." He didn't want the moment to end, though he didn't know why. There was something about Hertha, mix of quiet confidence and gentle mystery, that made the rain seem less cold. "Maybe next time," she said, breaking the silence, "you'll let me draw you." He smiled. "Maybe." She looked at him one last time, her eyes warm and bright under the lamplight. Then I'll see you around, Ethan, she said softly, and turned to climb the steps, her shoes tapping lightly against the wet stone. He stood there for a long moment, the umbrella still open above him. The rain continued to fall, whispering softly as if reminding him that life sometimes changes in the smallest ways in a forgotten umbrella. A chance smile or the space shared under a storm dot as he walked away. He caught himself smiling again. He didn't even know her last name, but the sound of her voice and the light in her eyes replayed in his mind over and over. It had been a long time since something had felt this unexpected. That night, when he got home, he placed the umbrella by the door and stared at it for a while. It looked ordinary, just another umbrella, but it carried the memory of her laughter, the sound of the rain, and that brief, quiet connection he hadn't known he was missing. He told himself it was nothing, just a passing moment. But as the rain kept falling outside, he found himself opening his laptop, pretending to work, while his mind kept drifting back to the girl with the sketchbook. Some part of him already knew this wasn't over. Something had begun that night, though neither of them had the words for it yet. For Ethan, the forgotten umbrella was more than a mistake. It was the beginning of something he hadn't realized he needed, something warm and unpredictable, like sunlight breaking through clouds after too many gray days. And though he didn't know it yet, that one small moment would return to him again and again whenever he thought of how life changes quietly, one unexpected encounter at a time, because sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come wrapped in rain. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Amelia. Her face, her voice, the way she had held the umbrella, it all lingered quietly in the corners of his mind. Days passed, and he found himself returning to the cafe, pretending it was for coffee, pretending he needed the work. But in reality, it was the hope of seeing her again, even for just a few minutes. Each time he arrived, he scanned the room, looking for the auburn hair, the sketchbook, the small curve of her smile. She was always there, near the window, light spilling over her as if the world had arranged it that way. He noticed details he hadn't before, the tilt of her head when she focused on her sketches, the way her fingers moved over the pencil as if each stroke mattered more than the last, the faint smell of paint that clung to her clothes. Ethan realized quickly that he didn't just like her presence, he was captivated by it. One afternoon, Amelia looked up from her sketchbook as he approached. "Hey," she said, her smile easy. "You've been coming here a lot." "I like the coffee," he said, shrugging, though neither of them believed it. "You're lying," she teased, laughing softly. "It's not just the coffee, is it?" Ethan shook his head. "No, not just the coffee." Her eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary, and then she closed her sketchbook. "Come on," she said suddenly. "I want to show you something." She led him out of the cafe and up a narrow stairwell behind an old bookstore. The stairs creaked under their weight, and Ethan noticed how different the world felt here, quieter, suspended, as if time had slowed. When they reached the top, she opened the door to a small studio. The walls were lined with sketches, paintings, and canvases of every size. Sunlight streamed through a large window, casting a soft glow over the room. "This is my little world," she said, gesturing around. "It's messy, but I like it that way." Ethan looked around, feeling both intrigued and slightly overwhelmed. There were faces everywhere, people caught mid-thought, strangers frozen in gestures that seemed both ordinary and profound. Then he saw it, a sketch of someone familiar, someone he recognized immediately. "Is that me?" he asked, pointing Dot. Amelia glanced over her shoulder and laughed lightly. "Not finished yet. I wanted to capture the moment, but I couldn't quite get it right." Ethan felt a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. He had never been drawn before, at least not like this, and the idea of being examined so closely made his heart beat faster. "Can I sit?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "Just don't move too much. Or do move whatever feels natural." He sat down carefully on the stool she offered, feeling exposed but oddly comfortable. Amelia moved around him, checking lines, adjusting her perspective, and occasionally brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her focus was intense, But when she looked at him, there was something softer, more intimate in her gaze. At one point, she reached for a pencil on a high shelf. Ethan instinctively stepped closer to steady the small stack of sketchbooks beside her. In that brief moment, he pressed against her shoulder, close, enough to feel her breath while she stretched forward on tiptoe. The room seemed to pause. Neither of them moved, yet everything shifted. There was a tension, fragile and quiet, that neither fully understood. It wasn't romance in the loud, dramatic sense, but it was their subtle, immediate, and undeniable. Amelia straightened, glancing at him over her shoulder. Her eyes held a flicker of surprise, but then she smiled. The kind of smile that made Ethan feel like he'd discovered something precious. He shifted slightly back, pretending to adjust his position, but inside he was aware of every heartbeat. Every silent beat of the air between them. "You're a difficult subject," she said softly, returning to her sketch. "Not because you're bad to draw, but because you don't stay still. And there's something else." "What?" Ethan asked, curiosity and nervousness mingling in his voice. "Something." "About you," she said, shrugging in a way that made him feel like the answer was both obvious and mysterious. "You carry thoughts that you don't show, and I keep wondering what they are." Kay chuckled, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Maybe I'm just a boring guy." "You're not boring," she said immediately. "You're interesting in ways people don't see at first. That's why I like drawing you. Because the challenge is understanding the person behind the quiet." Her words touched him more than he expected. For the first time, someone saw past his careful exterior, past the walls he'd built around himself. And in that quiet studio with sunlight falling through the window, he realized he wanted to be seen, fully, without pretending, without holding back. They continued like this for hours, though neither kept track of time. Ethan watched as she sketched, as she moved with intention, as her eyes narrowed slightly when she focused. Every small gesture seemed charged with life. He tried to concentrate on the sketch, on the idea of being a subject. But he kept getting distracted by her, by the way the light caught her hair, by the curve of her hand, by the faintest touch of her shoulder when she adjusted her reach out at one point. Ethan noticed himself leaning just a little closer when she examined a pencil mark. She caught his glance and held it for a moment, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't desire, not in the crude sense. But it was something stronger than friendships, something electric and tender all at once. Amelia paused in her work and looked directly at him. "You don't have to pretend here," she said. "Not with me. You can just be." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. It was rare for him to be given permission to be vulnerable, to show the quiet corners of himself without fear. And yet, standing or sitting near her, he felt the weight of those walls beginning to crumble, slowly, gently. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Okay," he said. I can try." And in that attempt, something shifted. The studio didn't feel like just a room anymore. It was a space of possibility. A place where the rain and the cafe and the chance encounter could evolve into something meaningful. Where moments like pressing against a shoulder or sharing a quiet glance weren't awkward or strange, but natural part of a story unfolding. Hours later, when Ethan finally left the studio, the world outside seemed different. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and glimmering under the late afternoon light. He walked slowly, carrying the memory of her touch, the sight of her focused eyes, the subtle tension of being near someone who made him feel alive in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't love at least, not yet. It was something quieter, more delicate, the beginning of longing. The awareness that someone had entered his life who might change everything, if only he let them. And Amelia. She stood at the window of the studio, watching him go, holding her pencil loosely. For a moment, she let herself hope. Hope that the quiet man who had stepped into her world might step in again. And that perhaps their story was only just beginning. The memory of that day, that small brush of shoulder and breath, would linger for both of them. It was a moment that neither wanted to define too soon, but both knew they would return to it again and again. Because sometimes the most important stories begin not with words, but with shared spaces, quiet glances, and the subtle electricity of being close enough to feel another person's presence. Ethan walked away from the studio, but the studio itself walked with him in memory, in heart, in quiet longing that neither had yet learned to name. After that afternoon in Amelia's studio, Ethan found himself caught between two conflicting emotions. On one hand, he wanted to return to sit in that quiet, sunlit room and watch her draw, to feel again the warmth of her presence and the subtle pull of their closeness. On the other hand, he feared that returning might make everything more complicated, that stepping too close to her heart might expose his own in ways he wasn't ready for. So he hesitated. Days turned into weeks. Ethan continued his routine visits to the cafe, but they became shorter, more distracted. He told himself it was for work, for coffee, for no reason at all. But the truth was, he was afraid. Afraid of losing the casual comfort of her friendship. Afraid of the tension that had existed in the studio. The memory of pressing against her shoulder. The quiet awareness of her breath that had lingered in his chest long after he had walked away. Amelia noticed immediately. She had always been attentive, the kind of person who could read subtle shifts in posture. A flicker in the eyes, a hesitation in a smile. When Ethan didn't come by the cafe as often, when his gaze drifted rather than lingered on her, she felt it. She wondered if she had done something wrong, if she had misread the signs that Ethan might feel the same way she did. But she knew him well enough to understand. Ethan was never impulsive. If he pulled away, it wasn't anger or disinterest, it was something quieter, something deeper. One rainy evening, she found him outside the cafe, standing under the dim glow of a streetlight. He looked like he was waiting, though, for what she didn't know. Maybe for the rain to stop, or maybe for the courage to decide what to do next. Amelia approached slowly, her steps careful on the wet pavement. "Ethan," she said softly. He turned, startled. But when he saw her, the tension in his body eased slightly. "Why'd you stop coming?" He looked at the ground for a moment, uncertain. The truth was too complicated to say aloud that he had thought about her constantly, that the memory of that one close moment in the studio had kept him awake at night, that he feared revealing his feelings might ruin the connection they already had. Instead, he chose the simplest excuse he could think of. "I didn't want to make things complicated," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. Amelia studied him, her eyes searching for the meaning behind the words. She could see that he was holding back, could feel the tension between them like a live wire suspended in the cold air. And she understood more than he realized. Sometimes the words left unsaid carried more weight than the ones spoken. "Ethan," she began, taking a step closer, "sometimes complicated is just another word for real." Her words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them. The rain fell steadily, but it felt distant, like a soft background score to a moment that demanded attention. He started, but stopped. What could he say? That he thought about her every day. That he remembered every detail of that afternoon in her studio. The way sunlight had fallen on her hair. The way she had stretched on tiptoe, reaching for a pencil. The faint brush of her shoulder against his own. That he had replayed the memory countless times, wondering if she thought of it too. The words felt too heavy, too raw, and he didn't know if he had the courage to say them. Amelia reached out, lightly brushing her hand against his arm. It was a small gesture, almost casual, but the impact was immediate. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, a mixture of longing and relief. She didn't speak, she didn't push, she just held space for him, allowing him to decide if he would step closer or retreat. The silence between them was filled with unspoken truths. Both of them understood that the world they had created in the studio, quiet, intimate, and safe, could not be contained in casual meetings at a cafe. Yet neither wanted to risk destroying what they had by forcing words too soon. So they lingered there, side by side, letting the rain fall around them, letting the moment stretch without resolution. Finally, Ethan found his voice. I just didn't want to lose this," he said, nodding toward the cafe and the quiet street around them. You, this is. Whatever this is. Months had passed since that quiet evening in the rain when Ethan and Amelia had stood side by side, neither speaking everything they felt, but both sensing the unspoken. Life continued, carrying on its usual rhythm. But for Ethan, nothing had been quite the same. Her presence lingered in his mind like a soft light that refused to fade, and he found himself thinking about her constantly, imagining her in the studio, sketching, smiling, moving in ways that left him unsettled yet deeply alive. Then, one morning, a small envelope arrived at his door. Inside, a card with neat handwriting invited him to Amelia's first solo art exhibition. The words made his chest tighten not with apprehension alone, but with a flutter of anticipation. He wasn't sure if he was ready to see her to face the emotions that had grown quietly between them, but some part of him knew he could not resist. Curiosity, longing, and a quiet hope pulled him toward the gallery that evening. The gallery was buzzing softly with people. Warm lights glimmered off the polished wooden floors, and the faint hum of conversation floated in the air like music. Ethan moved slowly through the crowd, his eyes searching for the familiar auburn hair, the face that had lingered in his thoughts for months. There she was, Amelia, standing near the back, her posture relaxed yet elegant, holding a glass of water and greeting visitors with a soft, graceful smile. Ethan felt a rush of warmth mixed with nervousness. He wasn't sure if she would notice him right away, or if she would act as if nothing had happened, as if their quiet, charged moments in the studio had meant nothing. But then she did notice. Their eyes met across the room, and a flicker of recognition and something more passed between them, silent yet unmistakable. He moved closer, weaving through the crowd until he stood beside her. "You look amazing," he said simply, his voice low but sincere. Amelia's smile widened. "Thank you," she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd come. I wouldn't have missed it," he said. And he meant it. The gallery was filled with her work, sketches and paintings capturing faces and moments with surprising depth. Strangers admired the art, commenting softly. But Ethan's gaze sought only one canvas, toward the back of the room, near a quiet corner. He saw it, a large painting titled "The Moment Between." He froze, almost unable to breathe. It was them. The memory of that afternoon in her studio was immortalized on the canvasee, and sitting on the stool, Amelia stretching forward on tiptoe, reaching for a pencil, her shoulder brushing his. But it wasn't just the physical likeness that struck him. It was the emotion, the tension, the hesitation, the fragile connection that she had captured with uncanny accuracy. The painting was intimate, yes, but it was pure, tender, and full of longing. Amelia leaned slightly toward him. "I never finished it," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the low murmur of the crowd, "because I didn't know how it ended." Ethan's heart raced. The distance they had kept, the words left unsaid, the longing that had filled the months, they were all in this one painting. And now, for the first time, it was laid bare before him, impossible to ignore. "Maybe it's not supposed to end," he said quietly, the words slipping out almost without thought. She turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his. There was a softness there, a warmth, a vulnerability that mirrored his own. "Maybe," she said. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, standing close yet not touching, letting the weight of the months and the quiet tension between them settle into something like understanding. The gallery around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them and the painting that held their unspoken story. Ethan reached out, hesitating just a fraction, then rested his hand lightly on the small of her baka, gesture that was careful, respectful, but full of meaning. Amelia didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly toward him, a subtle acknowledgement of the space they had shared and the bond that had grown in silence. "You've been thinking about this, haven't you?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. Every day," he admitted, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting hers again. I thought about you, about us, and I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want to ruin what we had." She smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You couldn't ruin it," she said, "not even if you tried. What we have, it's already real. Even in silence, even in distance, even in hesitation, it's real." Ethan felt a relief wash over him, mingled with a new surge of hope. For months, he had carried the weight of uncertainty, afraid of overstepping, afraid of losing her. But now, standing here, seeing the truth of their connection in her eyes and in the painting, he realized that the fear had been unnecessary. The gallery continued to hum around them, but Ethan and Amelia were in their own world. A space created from shared glances, unspoken words, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them. There was no rush, no need for grand gestures. Everything they had waited to say, everything they had felt but never voiced, could now be expressed simply in their presence. In the gentle brush of a hand, in the quiet acknowledgement of longing finally shared, Amelia reached for her sketchbook, flipping it open to a blank page. "Do you want to try?" she asked, holding out a pencil. Ethan looked at her, then at the pencil, then back at her eyes. "Me?" he asked, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes," she said. "Just sit. Don't think too much. Just be." He sat on a nearby stool, feeling the same nervous anticipation he had felt months ago in the studio. But now it was different. He was ready, willing to let himself be present, willing to be seen fully without holding back. Amelia's pencil moved across the page, and though he knew he was just a subject, he felt more alive than he had in a long time. As she drew, they exchanged quiet smiles, small words, and the occasional shared glance that said more than any conversation could. In that room, surrounded by her art, Ethan realized that love sometimes doesn't need dramatic declarations. Sometimes it begins in subtle ways, in shared moments, in the patience of understanding, in the willingness to be vulnerable and yet safe at the same time. Hours later, the gallery lights dimmed and the visitors began to leave. Ethan and Amelia stayed behind, lingering in the quiet space that had witnessed their story unfold. He felt a sense of completeness, not because everything had been solved, not because every emotion had been named, but because they had arrived together. Finally, acknowledging the bond that had been present from the very beginning, they stepped outside into the cool night air, the city quiet after the day's bustle. The world felt softer, more alive, more full of possibility. They walked side by side without needing to speak, knowing that whatever came next, they had discovered something real, tender, and lasting. And as they paused beneath a street lamp, their shadows touching lightly on the wet pavement, Ethan realized that the beginning of a love story didn't need fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it was found in the gentle brush of a shoulder, shared breath of quiet moments, and the courage to finally be present for someone who had been in your heart all along. The painting, the studio, the rain, the cafes, they were all part of the journey that had brought them here. And now, together, they were ready to step forward into whatever awaited. Knowing that some stories didn't need an ending, they simply needed to be lived, quietly, fully, and beautifully.